Three, two, one, here we go. Hello, everyone. I'm Brian, the Rain Man Lucas. Welcome to Rain Man's Take, observations on the world we live in. We're going to take a deeper dive into topics of interest to me, including politics, current events, history, popular culture, and social issues. You'll find the diversity of topics refreshing. In our clickbait, soundbite society, we rarely get the whole story. Rain Man's Take interviews interesting people as well as peeling back the onion on specific topics, all with the goal of getting people to think more deeply about a subject. My guest is Mary Kay Rendock from Connecticut. She's a 34-year veteran of public school education. She's taught for 34 years, grades ranging from K through 6 and everything in between. In that time, over her course of her career, she's done some work as a K through 6 instructional math coach and has provided math intervention for grades 4 through 6. So all things math, public school, she's an expert, and that's why I wanted to get her on here today. Mary Kay is a former Connecticut State Teacher of the Year, and we'll definitely get into that a little bit during our interview. She's known by her students, young and old, as being a caring, tough, but fair teacher. And most of all, they know that she really cares for them in their education. And I love that because in my mind, accountability means everything. And it sounds like she makes them accountable and she loves them for it. So, and they love her back. That's all. We're going to get into all those things today. So the reason for my interview and the reason why I wanted to talk to Mary Kay was primarily because you hear a lot on the news about sort of the millennial generation or the younger generation just coming into adulthood, how they're woke, how they're snowflakes, and all those things. And I wanted to get it from an expert who's been in the field of public education for as long as Mary Kay has, just to kind of get a sense for what she thinks the current state of public education is in America, and then also how she feels that not only with her but also throughout Connecticut and the public school system, how we're training our kids and teaching our kids to become adults in America. So without further ado, I want to introduce Mary Kay Rendock. Mary Kay, how you doing?
I'm well, Brian. How are you? Thank you very much for having me on.
No problem. How's that for cramming 34 years of experience into a couple minutes?
In a nutshell. There
Yeah,
you go.
Exactly. So why don't we do this, Mary Kay? Why don't you go ahead and tell me a little bit about how you got started in education, and then we'll just kind of work our way up from there.
Okay. I remember back when I was in high school, my mom was a teacher. My Aunt Naran was a teacher, and I had been coaching cheerleading since I was 16. So I kind of always knew that I liked working with kids in that capacity. My mom always tells a story of one summer when we were at the Cape, and we always would have big lobster fests. Like everybody would come over and we'd boil like 15, 20 lobsters. And there was this family that came to visit, and these two kids sat at the table with all of my cousins and I, all this raucous crowd, and they were very quiet and still, and they had never touched a lobster before. And so I said to them, let me help you guys, and I started showing them how to shuck the lobster, et cetera, et cetera. And their mom looked over at my mom and said, my kids don't talk to anybody. She's really good. She should be a teacher. And I don't know whether I thought about it then or not, but I got my associate's degree in early childhood because I didn't want to go to college. I know that was silly. But as soon as I stepped foot into college and did my student teaching and I did my student teaching in inner city Worcester as a 19-year-old, I knew right away that was for me. And so I finished there and I went on get my bachelor's in elementary education, knowing
Mary Kay, let me interrupt you real quick.
What?
Explain to people, inner city Worcester is not a walk in the park.
Oh, no.
Pretty rough,
no.
Pretty rough area.
It was a pretty rough neighborhood. I worked it was a kindergarten, and I remember I was 19, and I learned how to put children in restraints. Wow. And now I look back on that, and I'm pretty horrified that they would allow a student teacher with minimal training to do that. But I also knew how deeply these kids craved great relationships with people and how much they needed encouragement and how much they needed the positivity that I could offer.
Yeah.
And when I did my second round of student teaching, I was in Willimantic, Connecticut, which is a very impoverished town. And so it was socioeconomically different than Worcester, because Worcester, although, you know what, now that I think about it, neither one of them were predominantly African American or different cultures. It was more socioeconomic impoverishment. And so, but I knew when I came out of there, I was looking to go teach in Hartford, which is the capital of Connecticut. And, you know, it's a pretty, it can be some rough neighborhoods. And my friend Frank, who I worked with at the gymnasium, always laughed because he thought I was adorable and cute and very disillusioned. And I landed in Bloomfield, which is a very interesting town. Our demographics now we are 90% African American. We've got a small percentage of Hispanic kids that keeps growing. The demographics of our town are unreal. Like, we have kids that live up in the north end of town, which is incredibly rich and wealthy, and the homes are huge and they have beautiful lawns. And then we have kids that live right on the border of Hartford. And last week I organized a teacher parade. We had 100 cars. Then we totaled a 25-mile loop around town to wave to our kids and beep our horns. And one of the things when I designed the route was I wanted to enable the teachers that I teach with, all of them, to see the disparity just in our little town, because I have a feeling that many of them were not aware, and I thought it was a great way to open some eyes. So, but yeah,
I definitely want to touch on that. I definitely want to touch on that parade a little bit further on down, because that sounds really cool.
It was so much fun. I had a big blow up minion on my car. I loved it. I just had a blast. I cried like almost the entire time, you know. So, but I've been in 5th and 6th grade for the majority of my career. I love it. I started in 1st grade, which I thought I liked. You know, I enjoyed it, and then I got bumped right up to 6th grade, which was huge. But once I got there, I realized once again that's exactly where I belonged, and I stayed there for 28 years until I became a math coach, and now I'm back there. So.
Wow.
Yep.
So, tell me a little bit about the math coach. Was that, and I know that you had mentioned this in conversation in the past with me, was that when you were, am I correct in remembering that you were teaching the kid by using like sports references, like sports and math and sports or something like that? Or
right. During that time, I was asked by my building, because I served 6 schools as the K-6 math coach. Our pre-KK school, our K2, our 3-4, our 5-6, and one of our magnet schools. But I lived in my school, Carmen A. Race. And I always joke with people, you'll take me out of there in a box, you know. I'm not going anywhere. And so the 1st or 2nd year, I think we had restructured our unified arts classes, which are the math, music, art, PE, band, and all that. Yeah. And my principal needed me to do 1 class for 5th grade and 1 class for 6th grade a week, just Wednesdays. And she said, design it. What do you want to do? And I called it Mathletes, because I love sports. Like, I'm like right now with baseball being gone, I sometimes I can't even talk. And so I designed a class where all the math that we did was sports related. It was phenomenal. We did fantasy football. We did fantasy basketball, where the kids were all, you know, they had all these numbers to work within. They had limits. They had to calculate averages and stuff like that. Yeah. Everybody learned about a new sport that they've never learned about, and they discussed, you know, how is it scored? How is it judged? You know, so like the Olympics, you know, it's down to 1,000th of a second when it comes to those kinds of things. And one of my real passions is the Negro Leagues. And so I enlightened the kids. You know, we did a lot more than just watch 42. They all looked into a team, and they studied it, and they learned, you know, which major league players had played there, who were the stars of the team. So, because the Negro Leagues is such an exciting part of baseball history, and many, if you ever look at the Baseball Hall of Fame, there's lots and lots of folks that came out of the Negro Leagues. So it was a blast. I enjoyed it a lot. Now, I had 1 girl.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she was an equestrian.
Nice,
so,
nice. Yeah. So did you have any answers that had to do with hands? Like how many hands?
Oh, well, it was funny.
How many hands tall was she?
Yeah, she gave us a lot of information, because she was a show rider. And it turned out, because I had her when she was in 5th grade, and when she was in 6th grade, she was recruited and given a 6-year scholarship to Ethel Walker School for her equestrian talents. And that's a pretty prestigious school. Nice. And so, yeah, it was really exciting. And her mom was one of my kids when her mom was in 6th grade. And so being friends with Kim on Facebook, I get to follow Kayla and how she's doing. I think she's a sophomore now, so nice. It's pretty exciting. Yeah.
So I always love that story because it's something that most kids are really into in sports, and it's a way to create some pretty complex mathematical skills to that. So coming from a public school where I would imagine there's got to be a core level of the way you teach core topics, is there much room for that type of improvisation in terms of teaching styles, or was that more just because you were in that sort of that teaching coach or that math coach at the time? I mean, could you do that in your class right now?
I don't think so. I think I could do snippets of it. But no, I was asked to design a class, and I just was able to put the two things I love together the most.
Yeah.
When I rejoined the 5th grade math team, that was one of the strongest math teams I had coached. So being that for 5 years, I had really expanded my horizons from K all the way to 6. Yeah. I took a lot of my leads from my friend Jen, who's one of the best math teachers ever. And, now that I've got my feet back in the right place, now I'm adding a lot of my touch, my style, because my style of teaching is incredibly hands-on. Yeah. I definitely like to make things relevant. When I teach any math skill at all, one of the very first things I do is tell the kids why they need to learn it. How is this going to apply to your real life someday? Yeah. And sports is a great tool for that, because I love sports. Baseball is my sport, but I know enough about a lot of the others so that if a kid comes in and he's a big fan of cricket or a big fan of soccer, I can still converse and speak that language. I often compare the language of math to the language of sports. I'll say to the kids, so I got runners on the corner. I don't know whether if I want, 2 outs, I don't know whether I want a squeeze bunt or if I want to try to, put on a hit and run. And I'll ask them, do you know what I've said? And they, no. And I said, well, then that's just like learning to speak math. You need to learn the vocab. You need to learn the phrasing, and you need to understand what's going on. And so I speak sports all the time, especially when it's when I'm trying to pull in some boys that may or may not be really excited about math and about school. Enough of the girls too. I'm a softball coach. So when I see a girl that is struggling, I'll be like, I had a kid on my team. She was trying out for 3rd base, and she was, really trying hard, but it was hard for her. And just like this math is really hard for you. And, and I end up recruiting a lot of softball players that way too. So it's all good.
Nice. Ulterior motive. So let me ask you this, current state of affairs in where you are right now in the school where you are. How does it, well, and let's go even larger then. Let's start at the top. How is Connecticut doing in terms of the public school system? How's it? Is it? What's your take on the state of Connecticut's public school system?
Pre-COVID, and I think now that we're in a state of shutdown, some of the inequities are becoming even more clear than ever. Connecticut is probably much like other states. We have seriously disparate demographics. We have what's called the Gold Coast, which is down on the New York border. The Fairfield, that Fairfield County, lots and lots of money. And then we have some really large cities, Bridgeport, Hartford, Willimantic, that offer all the city challenges that, any other city would. Right. And then we have a lot of districts that, they're just doing their thing, and they're plugging along, and they've got like a mid-level socioeconomic range. But I don't know if you can put your handle on like exactly the whole entire state, because we have so many different parts.
Right.
I'm very
Right.
fortunate because having been the Teacher of the Year many years ago, I sit on the Connecticut Teacher of the Year Council. And every year when we select the new Connecticut Teacher of the Year, I get to go on 4 site visits of the 4 finalists.
Okay.
So I have been in schools for 2.5, 3 hours apiece all over the state. And it's been incredibly enlightening. One year I was in Greenwich, which is one of our per capita richest towns in the state.
Right.
And I was driving around with one of my colleagues looking for the alternative school in Greenwich. And I was like, wow, I was so surprised. You know, all the Greenwich kids are rich little smart kids, and why would they need an alternative school? So anyway, we found this little alternative school. And when I say little, I'm not even kidding. It was almost as if it was a one-room schoolhouse divided into fourths. And anyway, the bottom line was I learned that there are 2 housing projects in Greenwich that day, which I had never known, you know, and that was a real eye-opening experience. And last year we did a visit to this school where I was just looking my mouth, the technology, the architecture, the vibe, the everything. I couldn't believe it was an elementary school. It reminded me of a high-rise building in New York City, you know. And then the same year, we did a half day at Bridgeport's Harding High School that had just been built, and there was boxes still, and yet they were teaching. So it's crazy. It's crazy. The differences from one school to the next is insane. I have a Zoom conference tomorrow with some friends in the running group that I used to run with, teachers all over the state. You know, even from one town to another, the differences are just staggering sometimes. So,
yeah. And is it, how much, when you started to now, you know, obviously we talked about this in the intro, you know, you're known by your former students as someone who was tough. They made him accountable, but they also knew that you were doing it for the right reasons, and that you were 100%. Is that something that when you first started 34 years ago, is that how the teachers kind of were told to teach or to act, or was that something that you just kind of brought to the table? And then the next follow-on question to that would be, how have things changed in terms of how the teachers approach teaching in the current environment? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I first started teaching, I don't think there was much of a focus at all on what I would now call social emotional learning. Nowadays, it's monstrous. It's huge. And on the webinar I was just on with the commissioner, one of the things that they were talking about was how much, even though that plays a really huge role right now, relationships are first and foremost. Going forward, I think it's going to even be more important, and the stress will be, it will be one of the most important parts of the day. Back in the day when I first started, I don't believe that was ever really a part of things. I just always believed, and I always knew that if the kids weren't learning, if the kids weren't having fun, or if the kids weren't having fun, and if the kids didn't respect me and what I was trying to give them, it didn't matter what I said. You know, I think I recognized that right off the bat. And so I always was one, like, I remember when I was I was teaching science in 6th grade, and I was trying to teach the kids about how viruses are fought off by, you know, the cilia and all the phlegm and all that gross stuff. And we made a human throat. And then we would say to someone, okay, you're a virus. Okay, throat, here comes a virus. And we would throw the kid into the middle of this, and, you know, all this stuff would take place, and they would spit it out. And, you know, I always knew that that was important, but I always also knew that I'm not a pushover. I never was, never will be. That's how I was raised. I was raised as, you know, no pain, no gain. And as an athlete, that's something that I think was ingrained upon me. And as a coach, I do the same, you know. I insist. Years ago when I first started coaching, I was coaching cheerleading. All the kids needed to know the game. If you didn't know the game, God help you if you started a defense cheer when we had the ball. You know, off the team. Bye-bye. But at the same time, when you set expectations and then you back up those expectations with, I will help you get there. I will do whatever I need to do to get you there. And I will be here in case you need another push. Yeah. Those are the things that make kids, number one, believe they can. Because that's what I see my role is, mostly, is I got to convince kids that they can. Because very sadly, in their own lives, nobody else has done that sometimes. You know, kids don't hear you're awesome enough. And so that's the way I roll, you know. And I just had a Zoom chat. I had 7 kids in, and, you know, one of them, I had to say, Leon, honey, could you please put your camera on and turn your brother off? You know, but at the same time, you got to have fun, and you have to enjoy what you do. Kids will pick that out in 5 seconds if you don't. Yeah. You know, if you're afraid, they're gonna. It's just not a good look. It's not a good look. So.
And would you say, in terms of the kids, maybe today compared to what they were 20 years ago, and just in terms of, you know, what their domestic life is like, has that changed? Is there a lot more? Yeah. Back then, there was a lot more of a stable environment, whereas now it's not. And then there's got to be a challenge, obviously, for you to deal with all that, right?
Right. And I think there's so many differences. I mean, even as, you know, even in the past, say, 5 to 6 years, friends I know that have discussed this, education has been impacted completely by social media. And the fact that kids as young as 2nd and 3rd grade have a phone, and, you know, and that's a big thing. And, you know, the chat rooms, the group chats, there's one app, for instance, it's called Kick, I think. You can create an anonymous identity and slam people all over the place and nobody knows who you are. Yeah. And these kids have to live with this, you know. Yeah. One year, I remember I was at the lunch table and I had just found my phone because I used the ladies' room, which was the student bathroom, across from my classroom because it was closest. And I was in lunch and I'm sitting there and I went to look at my phone and I went, oh! And I threw my phone because there was porn on my phone and I was horrified. And then I realized I had found my phone, I had left it in the bathroom. And so one of the little 6th grade girls had dialed up some stuff on my phone and I was, you know, I was horrified. But having 24/7 access to those things, unless parents are so savvy that they're locking down every single device that these kids have access to, right, it's just so dangerous for them. They have no idea. And then things become very casual. And I think one of the things that we see in our district, and I think you hear it a little bit more, is just the meanness, you know, the bullying. And it's like they've become hardened to so much of this because of, in my opinion, a lot of this social media that they are just subjected to all the time. Yeah. You know, and you have 75,000 cable channels on your television. You know, it's just parents, I can't even imagine. My own children, they didn't have their cell phones until, I want to say, end of junior high school. And even then, social media was just in its infancy, you know, not at all. And I thank God. I think because, you know, everybody does this and, you know, it's just sad. Yeah. But yeah, I don't think that the family structures have impacted the kids too much, because I see a lot of interesting family structures, and, you know, could be the grandmother and a couple of the grandchildren or whatever. And they're just as functional and as healthy and as positive as a family that has 2 parents. I've also seen a family with 2 parents be as completely destructive and hateful as anything I've ever seen. So I think it's the people, not so much the structure. Gotcha. But it's just a very different time for kids right now. Very different time.
What do you do in your classes? Like, you make the kids put their phones in a bag or something, or how do you? Well,
our school has a just no phone policy. So all of our classrooms have a telephone right in them, and like I do this thing called Math Club. It's actually extra help in the afternoon, you know. Yeah. But you know, and if kids want to stay for Math Club, they'll use the phone, you know. And I'll have 4 or 5 kids waiting over there, and they know that phone is there for their access. We get calls during the day, unfortunately, which is really annoying, but
Yeah.
We have to be able to say to the parents, look, you do not need to have access through your texting to your child. Your child will have everything they need without it. If I find a phone, first time, I'm going to say, put it in your locker, lock it up. Second time, I'm going to hand it to the principal and say the parent needs to come in and get it. Because we're pretty locked down like that.
Okay.
Okay.
And now I can't imagine that's the case in junior high and high school. I mean, once they leave you, I'm sure they. Yeah. It seems to me like that should almost be across the board, that type of enforcement.
I know, because we share a building with 7th and 8th graders. Yeah. And, when I see the girls, they're always with the phone in the back pocket. And I don't know how the teachers manage to keep them in the back pocket, but I'm sure they do.
Yeah.
I know at the high school level, it's even harder. You have to have, I remember when my kids, I think it was my youngest daughter's senior year, her high school sent out a letter in May, said, in the fall, here is going to be our procedure. Get ready now. And
Right.
They were militant. But the administration of the school backed up those teachers, because if you say to a kid, let me have your phone, and they say no, boom, you're exploding right there. And it's just setting up a really bad thing. So, but if you have a principal that's 2 seconds away to come and say, you know what, can we talk about this in the hallway so Mrs. Rendock can keep teaching? Because you and I are going to have a conversation. Yeah. And that's what they did. And let me tell you, those kids knew it meant business. And when you're going to implement something like that, you have to have a team approach. Otherwise, forget it. Because you can't battle every little thing. It's just not worth your while.
Now, is that something, because that seems like it makes perfect sense and it's effective. Is that something that, is that a way that that you, meaning capital U, the state, or just public school in general, could you make that a universal thing? Or is it there's just too many different types of schools out there that you'd have a hell of a time trying to get that to be kind of an across the board policy?
Well, I think the expectation is that they don't come out during class across the board.
Yeah.
There's an awful lot of teachers that use them in their classrooms. Like, there's a ton of great websites where you can create interactive stuff. So like there's one called is it Kakuma or Kahoot? Kahoot, I think. And you design a quiz and the kids pull out their device and they can input answers right there, and you've got a graph on the board that tells you who's right and who's not. Yeah. So there is an awful lot of evidence and resources out there that can use these things just like you would use iPads. Yeah. But the thing about them is, like, you use an iPad that your district provides, you've got all the correct filters and you've got all the restraints that you can apply. Like, we have a system where when I set up my class with, we have Chromebook carts that we share. And when I put all of my kids on Chromebooks for an activity, I want them to have no other options. And so we have a lockdown system where we use this thing called Hapara, and there's no other windows opening. It's just not happening. So that's the thing. You have to be able to, structurally manage it. And the logistics, for a seasoned veteran like me, pulling out a Chrome cart's no big deal. For a new teacher, I mean, it all depends on what you have in your classroom in terms of environment, in terms of respect, in terms of expectations. So, and I think that's the same for the state. Some districts, it's not that big of a deal. Other districts, it is. So it all depends on what you choose to battle, because, there's only so many mountains you're going to die on. And you have to select the ones that are going to be the healthiest for everybody, because, there's too many things to argue about these days.
Yeah. So you could say that, parent involvement, parent interaction is probably one thing that would be super important. And if it's not, then that's a negative, that would have a negative impact on the kids. What are some other things that you see out there that in public education that you think could be done better? And what would be your sort of, how could you make those better? How could you improve on those things that you think need to change in public education?
One of the things, and we were just mentioning this on the webinar, I don't know if you know, but the Smarter Balanced Assessment and the PARC I don't even know what the park stands for, but these two giant pieces of assessment that came into play when most states adopted the Common Core.
Right.
You know, that's the nationalized test. Back when you and I were younger, I mean, we used to have like the Iowa Basics or something. I mean, you probably took something.
Yeah.
I was in a Catholic school, so we did those. But you know, before the Smarter Balance test, we had the Connecticut Mastery Test. And no matter what, those huge, you know, those huge standardized testings have so much impact on what goes on in your schools. And in my opinion, a very negative impact. We have students who maybe didn't have the greatest pre-K experience, so that when they show up in kindergarten, they may or may not know how to already count to 20. You know, when we have kids that can count to 50 by the time they get to kindergarten.
Yeah.
And so the disparity starts right away. If you don't have a lot of intervention systems in place to kind of shore up those canyons of just, you know, when you don't know, you don't know. Then you go to the next grade and you still don't know, and so the canyon gets larger.
Yeah.
And what we end up with is these giant ranges of learners in our classrooms. And then we're expected to bring all of those learners, no matter where they start, to the same end. And what happens is it's very difficult to address the children at the top who need more enrichment. It's also very difficult to address the kids at the lower end who may or may not have special ed support. And so in our district, I know the emphasis on standardized testing and data-driven assessment is insane, to the point of being unhealthy,
Really?
to the point of the children are doing nothing but testing, so that by the time they do get to May and they're expected to take this gigantic test, and I mean gigantic,
Right.
they are so burned out from all the practice that's required, because the people I happen to work for right now believe that that is the best way to prepare the children, rather than just taking on really great pedagogy and teaching the right way and teaching for inquiry and teaching in a hands-on manner and teaching kids at their level. So I think standardized testing is probably one of the worst things that's ever happened to education. And because, you know, Greenwich, those kids go into kindergarten being able to count to 100. Hartford, they may know how to count to 5. And yet all of them are compared, and then there's lots and lots of data that shows who's awesome and who's not. And it's no joke. It's you know, you can't measure kids on one, like the math test, for instance, is 2 days. 2 days. So their entire 5th grade existence is measured on 2 days. It's not smart. It's not wise.
Before the Common Core was put into place, what that system, and you mentioned it, Connecticut
Mastery test.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How did that differ in terms of teaching those kids? I mean, and because it sounds like, at least in your mind, it seemed like maybe it was more effective back in the day.
Well, it's interesting because when I first started teaching, the CMT, the Connecticut Mastery Test, was only given every other year. It was given in the odd years, all right? And then it became every year. And let me just say, do you know that when I first started teaching, it was given in October? Tell me how much sense that makes. They're going to measure last year's progress in October of the following year, which was insane, so that we would come to school. We did this every year. For the first 6 weeks of school or 8 weeks of school, we would do nothing but review from the year before. And then not too long before the Smarter Balance took over, they finally moved the Connecticut Mastery Test. First of all, it became every year, because all of a sudden all these data geeks were taking over and saying, oh, this is the best way to measure. It informs our instruction, blah, blah, blah. And so we started taking it every year. And then finally, not too long before we switched over, we did finally start taking it in April, which of course still didn't make any sense because your school year ended in June. But, you know, in order for them to have the data for the General Assembly and for the July 1 it was all driven by fiscal. And when I learned that as a part of a CEA committee I was on, I really was so so disgusted.
Yeah.
You know, and these things, they're not supposed to drive property values. The real estate agents are not supposed to share all these things, but they do. And it's so available nowadays that it's just, you know, it's awful.
Yeah. It's a shame that it has to get in the way of something as fundamental, you know, to a child's upbringing, as fundamental as education. That's a shame.
Yeah. And it's, you know, education is becoming a money-making business. And I can't tell you how much I hate that.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, you that's basically across the board in society right now. And what that breeds, obviously, is the ability to be corrupted, and the ability for all the negative things that money brings in.
Sure. Making decisions for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah. Yep. And do you think do you see that, like when you, I assume you probably have some former students that are now young adults. Did you see that? Did they come back and kind of talk to you about what their high school and maybe then college educations were like? And did they kind of give you an idea of how that all went based on kind of the foundation that you gave them? You
know, it's funny. My first students are in their early 40s. Wow. And so, yeah, I know. It's pretty amazing. And I am in contact with lots of them. And that's the beauty of being in the same school forever. Many years ago, during parent conference week, we started counting. It was a big joke around the school. How many parents were Mrs. Rendock's former students? So, and I've been blessed because many parents, I know one of my favorites, Thomas, he brought his kid to me in 5th grade and he said, Mrs. Rendock, I need Thomas Jr. to be in your class. He can't find his way, and I know that you'll help him out. And I mean, I don't think there's no greater compliment.
Oh, absolutely.
And and so it's adorable now because I'm connected with lots of them on Facebook. You know, over the winter, one of my young friends who graduated last spring and did a PG year, he worked for me last summer. He's a big football star, and he tutored in my math class. And then during the year when he came back from the New Hampshire prep school he was at, he tutored in my class again. And, you know, he doesn't remember, and many of the other ones don't, they don't remember the minutia of the testing and that kind of junk. They don't. Right. They remember they felt good. They remember they felt loved, and they remembered that they were safe when they were with us. Yeah. And when you think about your favorite teacher, go back and think, what was that? Why? Yeah. Because that person, that person believed in you. That person pushed you because they knew you could just get a little bit better at stuff. It's never about the stupid testing. It's never about that crap. You know, it's just not. And I know in our district and many others, image and, you know, the Q rating, those things are taking the place of the really important work that we do. And our district is so misguided in so many ways. We have a public relations director in our district. Yeah. And he makes more money than any of our teachers, all of us. It's gross.
Yeah. What, so as much as you're comfortable saying, what, if you were boss for a day, what would be the first couple of things you would immediately change about the whole system right now?
Oh, I've had conversations with my friends. If I ever won the lottery, I would create my own school. There would be no principal. Everything would be done on a team level. There would be a leadership team that was elected by the people that you work with. You don't need administrators. I mean, my friend Eileen is a dean of students, and she's excellent at it. And she is on the teachers. She's on our teachers contract, but she's the one who does all of the discipline. And she's amazing. She does mediation. She does social emotional work. You know, she gets these kids that are in trouble and says, what happened? Nobody ever asks that. Well, yeah, you punched me, but why? What pissed you off enough that you had to put your hands on somebody else? You know, and our school in that respect has really done a lot of great work. We've followed a plan, but that's what I would do. I would not want any administrators that, you know, there would be minimal testing. You have to do some. You have to, because you have to measure things. but you have to have good tools to do that with. And if you, and I said this for 5 years to all my math teachers, if you are doing the job that you should be doing, teaching kids about why when you divide 3 divided by half, why that number is a giant 6 instead of being a smaller number, like when you're doing 3 divided by 1, whole numbers, if they understand, well, it's because a half is smaller than 1, they're going to be able to puzzle through anything.
Yeah.
You know, and you have to teach the right way, and you can't be teaching for data. It's just not right.
Yeah. And what I'm about to say, preface by saying that I don't have kids, so I don't have to deal with this in terms of being a part of a child's education. But I always, and maybe it's just me, maybe it's just kind of the path that I've taken in my adult life, but I've always, when somebody says there shouldn't be any tests, I always say, well, how do we know, how do we make sure that they know what they're getting themselves in? Like you just said, if the teacher's doing it right, they're, but that always kind of gets me a little like, uh-oh, this is not good, because then it definitely seems like it could I guess diminish the quality of the product coming out of the schools.
No, absolutely. No, you have to measure. You absolutely have to measure in some form or fashion. But there's good measurement, and then there's measurement for numbers. And not okay. Like, for instance, right now, yesterday, I'm teaching remotely right now. And so our biggest challenge is getting the kids to do the work, because they're not in front of me, and there's only so many times I can text your mother. So yesterday, I'm a data geek, being a math teacher. And so last night, I started this spreadsheet, and I looked, and we are grading kids based on completion of their work. So if there's 4 assignments in math that week, if you do all 4 of them and you do them well, let's say you got 100, 100, 84, 72, but you've completed everything and it's on time, you are getting a 100 for the week, because we're grading on completion and quality. So I was looking at, because the first week in one of my classes, I had 6 kids, out of my 63 kids, I had 6, 3, 9, I had 10 kids who did not hand in one thing, not one. And so today, last night, 2, 4, now I'm down to only 8 kids that didn't hand in anything. So we're reaching these goals. I'm looking at, the first week I had about 25 kids that had 100% or, everything turned in. Now I'm up to like 45%. Those are the things you've got to measure. And that's the best way to do things, And these kids, like some of these kids that are struggling learners, they were always solid C kids in school. But because they're doing everything, they're working real hard. I do a lot of my work on Google Forms so they can go back in and re-improve their score. I had one girl, she took an assignment 5 times because she wanted that 100, and she got it. That's good stuff. That's good data. So
getting back to that real quick, give me one. So let's say you won the lottery and you wanted to keep your money. What would you do other than that to, like, the current system? What would be one thing you think would go a long way to maybe helping to make public education better? Is it I don't know, different classes? Is it better teachers? What do you think could improve the situation?
I definitely think that we really need to work harder with our student teachers. There's a lot of people that think, like, there's a University of Connecticut has a 5-year program where the kids do 4 years in the school, and then they do a full year with an experienced teacher. Other student teaching programs, you're there for a semester, and by week 8 or 9, all of a sudden you're given gradual control, and by the end of the semester, you're on your own teaching. You still have that teacher sitting there in case anything blows up, but I think we need to do a much better job at educating our student teachers. Like, I know, because I'm a mentor, and the kids that come out of UConn, for instance, that 5-year program, whoa, are they much better supported and prepared and ready than people that come out of different programs. Like, we had a student teacher just this semester in my colleague's class who came from an online school. Bye-bye.
Really?
Yeah.
It's that dramatic of a drop
Oh
off.
my God. Oh my God. And you know, to her credit, she really was lovely and she tried really hard. But no, if we're going to, and the other thing we need to do is we need to work on recruiting minority educators. You know, I teach in a predominantly African-American school, and I can count my Black colleagues on 2 hands.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just wrong. But at the same time, because my students, for instance, the one I mentioned, the class of 2019, I had this group, I called them the Geek Squad. Oh, they were brilliant. I happen to also have these kids for 2 years, from 5th grade to 6th grade, and their math prowess was like off the hook. And I've always said to the girls, especially, you are brilliant, you are a girl, and you are African American. You can write your ticket. One of my girls got a full ride to Alabama A&M for engineering. Full ride, 4 years. Yep.
It's awesome.
And yet, somebody would want Tori to come out of that experience and go into education and make less than $50,000 a year, or take the engineering path and come out and start with 6 figures. Duh. Yeah. It's a no-brainer.
And I'm just kind of off the top of my head as you say that, it seems to me a good, and again, I'm just kind of thinking about this right now, but, you know, try to find some pool of people who have been maybe successful in business or in another aspect of it, and then they transition over to a teacher. So
right, we have a program in Connecticut called the ARC program, Accelerated. I don't even know what it stands for, but that's what it does. Yeah. It takes a person who's got a bachelor's degree and is very, you know, in their other profession, whatever it is, and then they go through an abbreviated program, and because all of a sudden they've decided they wanted to teach. You know, and in my mind, teaching is a calling. You either can or you can't. You know, it's cut and dry. And I have suggested, and where you teach is also important. Like where I teach, it's hard. I'm not going to lie to you. I went and spent some time in a white district, I'll call it, and I saw a teacher teach for almost 2 hours with not one interruption from a kid. And I was like, this happens? You know, and in my school, I get interrupted, not as much as, you know, more than I want, but at the same time, we still get the job done. Yeah. So when you've got a person that comes out of, let's say, engineering, you know, they come to teach, you know, upper level math, or a chemist who comes to teach chemistry, because chemistry is a lost art, and it's really hard to find good chemistry teachers. They may know so much about their subject matter, and they may be absolutely brilliant, but if they can't convey that in a productive and desirable way, who cares? You know, if you put Bill Gates in front of a computer class and he can't deliver the lesson, it doesn't matter. Right. So in some respects, I think those programs are important, because some people might have chosen the more lucrative profession first, but still have that teaching bug in their heart and then be able to do it. But on another hand, I think it's a big slap in the face to teachers that you can just say, oh, well, I know a little bit about chemistry, so I can teach it. So it's tricky. It's tricky. Yes. And I know right now Connecticut just joined a program, I don't know the name of it, where we are educating and training, because we have lots and lots of paraprofessionals or instructional assistants of people of color. And so we're taking them and we're saying, you know what, you are terrific with the kids. We want to help you get your bachelor's degree, get your teaching certification, and get you in front of classes, because they may not have had the opportunity to go to college. And yet, you know, so it's so interesting nowadays, you know, and people will say, well, you know, Black kids need Black teachers. And I agree. I think we need way more in my district. Does that mean I'm not a successful teacher because I'm not Black? Oh, hell no. You know, I've been teaching in a predominantly African-American district, and I love love my kids.
Yeah, and I mean, there's definitely something to be said about that. And on the NFL channel, they have a great commercial. They always talk about their Inspire Change campaign.
Yeah,
And
love them.
one of them is about the police outreach, and the police chief is an African American guy, and he's like, they just need to be able to at least see that. Yeah, that looks like them can get to this point. So
exactly.
You're obviously teacher of the year, and you're a killer out there. And, but it definitely goes a long way to at least let them know that that's something that they can I guess.
Well, yeah, and even like years and years ago, I don't remember because I remotely remember the 60s. I definitely have a definite visual of when after Martin Luther King was assassinated, there was riots in Hartford, which is the capital city near where I am. My father was taking my mom's two aunts back into the city because they lived in the South End. And I have a picture it's burned in my memory. And he took the two ladies in the car, and he took his shotgun, and he took his dog because he went to go into the city.
Wow.
And, it was different because there was riots. Both my parents grew up in Hartford. My dad grew up in a pretty tough neighborhood, my mom in the South End. But I just remember, the civil rights movement being so huge. And many years ago, I would say to the kids, well, what about this? What about this? And they would be like, I don't know. And so I started developing a collection of films. And that became, before you talked about, well, are you able to teach the sports within your math? I made time to teach civil rights to my students because they didn't understand the struggle that people went through to win their ability to be in a less, or to not be in a less desirable school. And I think that's important too. And just giving those kids the knowledge of that history. And then I passed them on to my sister from another mister, I call her, Gail. And together we've just, really enlightened the kids to the struggle. And, this is not something you can take for granted. Your grandparents struggled. Your parents worked hard. You need to get this done. And that's another part of that whole, I'm important. My history is important. They don't teach it in school like they should. They do teach it in high school. I've seen, a lot of civil rights history classes, and it's becoming more common. Yeah. But, if you look in a typical social studies book, where's the Black people? In the slave section. Yeah. There's a whole lot more that they've contributed.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that's one of those things that you always, it's that adage of the first generation makes it, the second generation sort of kind of lives on the laurels, and then the third generation doesn't have any idea what the first generation did to get them.
Exactly.
I mean, that can be across the board, but
of course
it's a little bit more pronounced, like you were saying, with the whole idea of not understanding what the civil rights was all about.
So, and and much of that, I mean, that all happened within my lifetime. That's kind of scary.
Yep. So we only have a couple minutes left. Let's call it maybe 5 minutes or so. Before we leave, I definitely want to touch base about the whole Teacher of the Year thing. How did you get selected? And then B, tell me about the vomit comment.
It was truly one of the most amazing years of my life. I was selected Bloomfield Teacher of the Year first, and then you fill out this giant application for the state, and I put it off for the whole summer. I did. And I did it like 2 nights before, but you had to write, like probably 8 or 10 different essays answering different questions, your philosophy, all things. And I wrote right from my heart. If anybody knows me, I may be a lot of things, but I'm not phony. And so I got a call saying, oh, you've been selected as a semifinalist. And I was like, oh my God. So I went to the state capitol, to the legislative office building. I was first out of, I think, 15. And they asked us to do a presentation on something you think is really important. And I talked about Jackie Robinson. I love baseball. I then was called and they said, all right, you're a finalist, so we're going to come and visit your school. They brought like 18, 20 people. It was like the invasion of Normandy. My principal and my colleagues, everybody was just adorable. And then they called me like a week later and said, you know, hey, you're it. And I'm like, what am I, you know? And I just, I was in awe of the whole honor. You know, every step of the way they would say, do you have any questions? I'd be like, no, I'm good. The day of the visit, the best part, and I wish this for every single person I've ever met, I got to sit in a room and listen to 4 or 5 groups report out about all the things that people had said to them about me.
Yeah.
There just wasn't enough tissue. You know, I was just, you know, somebody said, oh, you changed their life. And I go, oh, that must have been Veronica. And they go, no, it was somebody else. And I'm like, oh, somebody else thinks that, you know. But I still, I was the class of 2006. We got to go to the White House. I got to meet George W. What a gracious man he was. And I was never on the side of his politics. But he was just such a tremendous person. And I just really enjoyed my time.
Yeah.
I had I said to him, because when I walked into the Oval Office, it was very important that I did not lie. And I didn't want to say, geez, it's really nice to meet you. So I said, I had this all prepared. I said, sir, my Nana is your biggest fan. And that was perfect truth. And it was a lovely thing. And he goes, hold on a minute. And he goes over to the resolution desk and he brings me back a little pin. And he says, please give that to your Nana. And I'm like, oh my God, absolutely. And now my Nana wore it when she was buried and I now have it, which is really sweet. And then of course we got to go to space camp. We got trained all week long by astronauts to go on the zero gravity, what was it? It was called zero G flight. Yeah. It was great because the Monday when we first got to Alabama, I was sick as a dog, and I was so afraid, and because I'm one that gets sick on a plane. So, but you know, we did everything, and even you know the cyclical thing that goes the helio, and my leader, his name was Dan, and I said, Dan, listen, I am here. I will never be here again. I must do this. But I'm going to tell you, you are to put it on the lowest setting of anything. And when I say stop, you stop. So I did it for about 30 seconds and I got off. The day of the zero G flight, we had to get up at like 4 a.m. And we did get some prescription. We had to sign our life away. They gave us prescription motion sickness medicine, which was perfect. Yeah. It was so incredibly cool. It's exactly like you think it would be. You just all of a sudden, you know, we started with lunar G, then we went to Mars G, and then we, you know, got gradually. I still show the videos to the kids. You know, I did a Superman across the cabin, right into the wall. When we were finished, I had more bruises on me that day than anything, but I wouldn't trade it for the world. It was, and no other Teacher of the Year class ever got treated to that. So how we ended up being the ones, I'll never know.
Maybe you guys broke the airplane and they won't let them in there anymore.
I think that was when zero G was just starting to become a thing. And just like with, well, you know what else is 20 years before that, Krista McAuliffe, remember when they wanted to revitalize the space program? What they do, they put a teacher on it. We got to meet Krista McAuliffe's mom that year down at space camp, which was extraordinary. Yeah. But yeah, and it's just so funny with all this COVID stuff. About 3 weeks ago, I organized a Zoom chat with my colleagues. So we had a Zoom chat with people from North Dakota, South Dakota, Tennessee, New York, New Hampshire, Maine, Alaska. She came in later. I mean, so I still have relationships with these people. You know, I'm still friends, and it was truly one of the best and most amazing thing that's ever happened to me. And, you know, I still feel like, I don't know why it was me, you know, but I do love what I do. And that's just the bottom line. I love people say, you know, this is your 34, you're getting ready to retire. And I'm like, you know what? I still love what I do. I think I'm still pretty good at it. Yeah. And I think I'll know when I'm ready. And I don't think I'm ready yet, you know? So that's the thing. If I'm still doing a good job and the kids are still, like I got kids, they all know my cell phone now. I got this one little dude, he FaceTimes me every day. Miss Rendock, I can't get on my computer. I'm like, Dior, honey, it's all right. We got you, you know? Yeah. So, you know, I love it. And I still have people, every time something happens, like somebody will put, like when we did the teacher parade last week, one of my formers, who is one of my favorites, I performed the wedding ceremony for him and his wife. And Michael, the year that Michael was in my class, he found out that his mom was actually his grandmother and his sister was actually his mother. So he was suicidal. It was a nightly call. Michael, it's Miss Rendock. How you doing? You know, and now his kids, I've seen them all in school. I've done groups with them, and you know, so he'll put out a big thing like afterwards, because I texted him and I said, you're definitely going to be at that parade, right? You know, and he said, yeah. So he puts this big thing on Facebook, Miss Rendock, you're so bad, you know, and I still get all these kids, and every time he does something like that, I get 4 more kids that friend me, and I'm like, oh my God. You know, like I got a guy whose name is Jermel. He went and played for the University of Idaho football, but then he stayed out there, and he's this great football coach. And you know, I'm in awe of the memories that these kids have, and that they still think so very kindly of me. And you know, I'm just blessed.
Nice.
I love what I do.
Good. I think probably the just to kind of round this out, probably the takeaway or the you know, what somebody listening to this should take away is really the future of public education probably rests in the caliber of teachers that are coming into the profession now. And if you thought about it, or if you ever thought you might have something to offer, you know, take a look at teaching. You know, even if you're currently doing something else and you think you want to be a teacher, it sounds like, at least based on our conversation today, that's really what is going to make or break public education moving forward, and probably just education in general. And that's having the good, passionate teachers.
100%. It's the hardest job ever. The hardest job you'll ever do, but the rewards completely outweigh that every time. Every time.
I love it. All right, that's going to do it. Let me just, for pure transparency, I might as well say it now, but is my cousin. So talking about her dad and her mom and her great aunts, I know exactly who she's talking about, and I know exactly where they lived in Hartford. So in all transparency, Mary Kay is very close to me, and I've known her forever.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for your time, Mary Kay. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, buddy. It was a pleasure. And I love your podcast, Rain Man. Go.
Well, I appreciate
Go team.
it. Hey, listen, we're going to close it up this way. If you're in the military, police, fire, or first responders, if that's any of you out there, thank you very much for your time, for your effort. Thanks for watching Rain Man's Take, Observations on the World We Live in. If you like the content, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. You can also follow Rain Man's Take on Instagram at Rain Man's Take. Also, check out our website at www.rainmanstakepodcast.com and send your comments to rainmanstake@gmail.com. Keep an eye out for future podcasts, which will be coming out every Thursday at 5 p.m. West Coast time.